Have you ever wondered what would happen if our deepest beliefs about faith and religion were turned upside down in an instant? That is exactly what happened to Father Jonathan, a devoted priest from Wolverton, North Dakota. After more than 3 decades dedicated to his mission for God, he experienced a near-death encounter so profound, a direct meeting with Jesus Christ, that it revealed unexpected truths. What he witnessed not only shook the foundations of his personal faith, but also raised profound questions about the true nature of God's love and grace. This is not just a story. It's a powerful spiritual journey, a call for all of us to reflect on faith, truth, and the real meaning of life. But before I continue to read this stream of revelation, I will ask you if you have any testimony that you would want to share with us, and with our viewers. You can do so by sending us your testimony through this email address, eternalbiblestories@gmail.com. You can find this down the screen of this video. Share your dreams, visions, and near-death experience with us to change someone's life for better. Please write them well so they can be readable to our audience. Thank you. Here is a true near-death story of a priest named Jonathan. He had a life of dedication and teaching the flock of God, but he discovered a horrifying truth through this near-death experience. So what is that truth? Let's read his letter with us. It began as an ordinary Sunday, much like any other during my 3 decades of ministry. The church was filled with familiar faces, people I had guided, counseled, and prayed for over the years. I was delivering my sermon, a reflection on faith and steadfastness, when an unexpected pain gripped my chest. It was sharp, overwhelming, and relentless. I remember gripping the edge of the pulpit, trying to steady myself, but my vision blurred, and darkness consumed me. The next thing I knew, I was no longer in the church. I was standing in a place unlike anything I had ever imagined, a realm suffused with radiant light, so pure and warm that it seemed to penetrate my very soul. The peace there was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of pain or worry. It was a deep, all-encompassing tranquility, as if every burden I had ever carried had been lifted. And then I saw him, Jesus Christ. There were no introductions, no need for explanations. I simply knew. His presence was undeniable, unmistakable. He stood before me, emanating a love so profound that it brought me to my knees. My entire being recognized him, not just as the Savior I had preached about for so many years, but as the source of life, love, and truth itself. I expected words of affirmation, some acknowledgement of the life I had lived, the sermons I had preached, the sacrifices I had made in his name. But what I received was something far deeper and more humbling. Looking into his eyes, which were filled with compassion and understanding, I heard him speak. "My love is greater than what you've ever taught," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "My grace encompasses all, far beyond the limits you've set." In that moment, my heart sank. His words were not harsh or condemning, but they pierced me with the weight of their truth. I saw flashes of my life's work, the sermons I had delivered, the doctrines I had upheld, the times I had unknowingly placed conditions on God's love. I realized how often I had confined his grace to the boundaries of human understanding, reducing his infinite love to something finite and limited by tradition. "You've spoken of my grace," he continued, "but you've not fully understood its depth. It knows no bounds. Jonathan, it is for all people, not just those who fit into the framework of your teachings. but for the broken, the lost, the forgotten. It is greater than you can imagine. I felt overwhelmed, not by guilt, but by a profound sense of humility. My ministry had been sincere, my intentions genuine, yet I had missed something so essential. I had preached about God's love and grace, but I had failed to fully grasp their boundlessness. Images of my congregation filled my mind. The woman who had come to me in tears, unsure if she could be forgiven. The young man who had turned away from the church, feeling unworthy of God's love. The countless souls who had looked to me for guidance, but perhaps left with a sense of exclusion rather than embrace. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt before him. "Lord, I didn't know." I whispered, "I know, Jonathan," he said, his voice filled with kindness. "But now you do. And with this knowledge comes a calling, not to condemn yourself for the past, but to walk forward in truth, to share my love and grace as they truly are, infinite and unconditional." In that moment, I felt a love so overwhelming that it brought a peace I had never known. I was not being judged. I was being invited to see, to change, to grow. It was as though my entire life had been leading to this moment, this revelation. When I woke in the hospital, the light of that place still lingered in my heart. I opened my eyes to see the worried faces of my family and parishioners, their relief evident as I stirred. But I was no longer the same man. That experience, those 6 minutes in eternity, had transformed me. I realized I could no longer preach the same messages I had before. My ministry needed to change, to reflect the limitless love and grace of Christ that I had seen and felt. The journey ahead would not be easy. I knew that. Sharing this revelation, challenging long-held beliefs, and reshaping the way I ministered would likely be met with resistance. But I also knew that I could not go back to the way things were. Jesus had shown me a truth so profound that it had to be shared. His love knows no limits, and His grace is for everyone. This truth, this calling, would become the cornerstone of my life moving forward. Father Jonathan's near-death experience revealed a truth so profound that it redefined his understanding of faith, salvation, and the very nature of God. In the 6 minutes when his heart had stopped, he found himself standing in a place of radiant light and perfect peace. Before him was Jesus Christ, radiating a love so overwhelming that it seemed to embrace every part of Jonathan's being. In that sacred moment, Jonathan learned something that would forever change his life and ministry. God's love and grace are far greater than anything he had ever taught or imagined. For decades, Jonathan had faithfully ministered to his congregation, teaching that salvation required adherence to certain doctrines and practices. He had believed he was guiding people toward a deeper relationship with God by emphasizing the importance of discipline, obedience, and tradition. But as he stood in the presence of Jesus, he realized how limited his understanding had been. "My grace encompasses all, far beyond the limits you've set," Jesus told him. These words pierced Jonathan's heart, not as condemnation, but as a revelation. In an instant, he saw flashes of his ministry, the sermons he had preached, the counsel he had given, and the countless lives he had tried to touch. He realized how often his teachings had unintentionally placed conditions on God's love, making people feel they had to earn His grace through their actions or meet impossible standards to be worthy of salvation. Jonathan thought of the many individuals who had come to him over the years, burdened by guilt and shame. Some had feared they could never be good enough to receive God's love, while others had turned away, believing they were beyond redemption. He remembered their faces, their stories, and the heaviness in their hearts. Now, standing before the Savior, he understood how deeply these misconceptions had wounded them. God's grace, as Jesus revealed, was not something confined by human rules or religious traditions. It was infinite, boundless, and freely given to all. It reached across every barrier, cultural, theological, and personal, and extended even to those who felt they were unworthy. Jonathan saw with clarity that the love of God was not for a select few who met certain conditions. It was for everyone, regardless of their past, their mistakes, or their circumstances. As he reflected on this revelation, Jonathan felt a deep sense of both liberation and grief. Liberation, because he now understood the true depth of God's love and grace. Grief, because he realized how many people had been hurt or excluded by the limited view of faith he had unknowingly perpetuated. He thought of those who had walked away from the church, believing they would never measure up, and those who had stayed but carried a hidden sense of unworthiness. In that radiant place, Jesus' words echoed in Jonathan's heart. My love is greater than what you've ever taught. This was not a rebuke but an invitation, a calling to see, to understand, and to share this truth. Jonathan knew that his ministry could never be the same. He had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at fulfilling his mission in a way that reflected the boundless love of Christ. When Jonathan returned to life, awakening in the hospital surrounded by worried faces, he was a changed man. The light and peace of that sacred encounter remained with him, along with a clear purpose: to share the truth of God's love and grace with the world. No longer would he preach a faith confined by human understanding. Instead, he would dedicate his life to tearing down the barriers that kept people from experiencing the fullness of God's grace. He would remind them that they didn't need to be perfect or follow rigid rules to be loved by God. His grace was already theirs, a gift waiting to be received. Jonathan's experience became a cornerstone for his new ministry, one focused on spreading the message of unconditional love and limitless grace. It was not an easy path. He faced skepticism, resistance, and even criticism from those who held tightly to traditional interpretations of faith. But he pressed on, knowing that this truth was too important to keep to himself. Through his sermons, his counseling, and his interactions with others, Jonathan shared the liberating truth: God's love knows no boundaries, and His grace is for all. It is a love that reaches the broken, the lost, and the forgotten, a grace that transforms, heals, and redeems without condition. Father Jonathan's story became a testament to the boundless nature of God's love, a reminder that no one is beyond the reach of His grace. It challenged people to rethink their understanding of faith, to let go of judgment and exclusion, and to embrace the radical, all-encompassing love that Jesus offers to everyone. After recovering, Jonathan faced immense challenges as he began to share the profound truth revealed to him during his near-death experience. What had been a defining moment of clarity for him became a source of tension and division for those around him. The journey ahead proved far from easy, as he encountered skepticism, resistance, and even outright rejection from those he loved and had served faithfully for decades. Many members of his parish, including his wife, Margaret, found it difficult to accept the changes in his beliefs. Margaret, a woman of deep faith and unwavering commitment to the traditions they had built their lives upon, struggled the most. The man she had supported and admired for years now seemed almost unrecognizable. A husband who spoke of a God's grace that transcended the boundaries of doctrine and tradition. A grace that was unconditional and all-encompassing. Their conversations often turned into tense debates, with Margaret clinging to the certainties she had relied upon for so long. She questioned whether Jonathan's experience had truly been from God, or whether it was a test of their faith. For Jonathan, who had always leaned on Margaret's steadfast support, this shift in their relationship was heartbreaking. What had once been a source of strength and unity for them became fraught with misunderstanding and pain. The parish, too, was deeply shaken. Jonathan had been a trusted spiritual leader, a figure of stability for the community. But now, his revelations seemed to challenge the very foundation of their beliefs. Some parishioners accused him of abandoning the teachings they had cherished for generations. They whispered among themselves, calling his new perspective dangerous and divisive. Others viewed his message as a radical departure from the core principles of their faith, labeling it heretical. Yet there were those who listened, who saw in Jonathan's words a truth that resonated deeply within their own struggles. These individuals, though fewer in number, encouraged Jonathan to continue sharing his vision of a God whose love and grace knew no limits. Despite this small but growing support, the once vibrant and cohesive congregation grew fractured, leaving Jonathan feeling increasingly isolated and, at times, deeply discouraged. Despite the pain of rejection and the loss of relationships he held dear, Jonathan remained steadfast. He understood that the truth he had encountered was not an easy one to accept, but he also knew it was the only path to true freedom and faith. He recognized that breaking free from deeply ingrained traditions and misconceptions often came with resistance, and he braced himself for the challenges ahead. Jonathan approached his mission with patience and compassion. He understood that transformation could not be forced, and instead of imposing his message, he sought to share it gently. He spoke of God's boundless love and grace not as a rebuke of past beliefs, but as an invitation to grow deeper in faith. Jonathan believed in planting seeds of understanding rather than demanding immediate change. He accepted the reality that not everyone would be ready to hear or embrace what he had to say. Through prayer and reflection, Jonathan found the strength to endure the isolation and criticism. He spent hours in quiet communion with God, seeking wisdom and guidance. In these moments, he was reminded that even Jesus himself had faced rejection, misunderstanding, and scorn, yet he remained unwavering in his love and purpose. This understanding gave Jonathan the courage to persevere, knowing that his mission was not about seeking approval, but about sharing the truth that had transformed his own heart. Jonathan's journey became one of quiet perseverance. He continued to preach about the boundless love and grace of God, using his own vulnerability and struggles as a testament to the transformative power of the truth. Slowly but surely, some began to listen, not in a rush or a wave, but one heart at a time. These moments of connection, though small, gave Jonathan hope and renewed his determination. Though the cost of standing on the truth was high, Jonathan found solace in the peace that came from living authentically. He learned to let go of the need for universal acceptance, trusting that God's plan was greater than his own understanding. With every painful loss and every small victory, Jonathan discovered a deeper faith, a faith that was no longer bound by tradition but rooted in the limitless love of Christ. In time, Jonathan's perseverance began to bear fruit. While not everyone in his parish came to embrace his message, those who did experienced a renewed sense of hope and freedom in their faith. They began to see God not as a distant judge, but as a loving Father whose grace and love were truly for all. For Jonathan, this was enough. He understood that his role was not to convince everyone, but to share the truth with humility and love, leaving the rest in God's hands. Jonathan's journey reminds us that the path to truth is rarely easy. It requires courage to challenge deeply held beliefs, patience to endure rejection, and a willingness to let go of what is comfortable for the sake of something greater. Yet, it is also a path that leads to the deepest freedom and peace, a freedom found not in the approval of others, but in living fully within the grace and love of God. His story serves as an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own journey of faith. It reminds us that while truth may be difficult to accept, it is the only way to experience the fullness of God's love, a love that calls us to grow, to seek, and to trust in Him, no matter the cost. In the quiet moments of loneliness and doubt, Jonathan turned to prayer as his sanctuary. It became more than a ritual. It was his lifeline, a channel through which he could unburden his soul and reconnect with the presence of God. Each time he knelt in prayer, he found himself enveloped in a sense of peace and warmth, as though God Himself was there, listening, guiding, and reassuring him. Prayer became the foundation of Jonathan's strength. In the face of rejection from his congregation and the emotional distance growing between him and Margaret, he sought solace in the presence of the Lord. When the weight of isolation threatened to crush his spirit, he poured out his heart to God, expressing his fears, frustrations, and longing for understanding. It was in these moments that he felt God's voice, not in words, but in a profound sense of calm and clarity. Through prayer, Jonathan began to understand his mission on a deeper level. He realized that he wasn't called to force change upon others or to convince them of the truths he had seen. Instead, his role was to plant seeds of truth in their hearts, trusting that God would nurture and grow them in His own time. This revelation lifted a heavy burden from Jonathan's shoulders. He no longer felt the pressure to fix everything or to win every argument. His mission was simpler, yet more profound: to live and speak the truth with patience, love, and unwavering faith. In his prayers, Jonathan often wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and fear. "Lord," he would whisper, "am I enough? Can I truly carry this message when so many reject it?" And in those moments, he felt God's reassurance, a quiet but powerful reminder that he was not alone. The light of Christ filled his heart, dispelling the shadows of doubt and renewing his resolve to continue the path set before him. Prayer also became a source of wisdom for Jonathan. It taught him to approach others with humility and compassion, understanding that not everyone was ready to receive the truth. He learned to let go of his desire for immediate results, trusting that God's timing was perfect. "Sow the seeds," he felt God urging him, "and leave the harvest to me." As Jonathan prayed, He found the strength to forgive those who had turned away from him and to love them despite their rejection. He prayed not only for himself, but for the people in his congregation, for Margaret, and for those struggling to reconcile their beliefs with the message he now carried. His prayers were filled with hope, not just for change, but for healing and unity in God's love. Over time, prayer became more than a response to hardship. It became a way of life. In every moment of uncertainty, every step of his journey, Jonathan turned to God, seeking guidance and drawing from an endless well of grace. It was in prayer that he found the courage to keep going, the patience to endure, and the peace to accept that the path he walked was exactly where he was meant to be. Even in his darkest moments, when the pain of loss and isolation felt unbearable, Jonathan knew that prayer anchored him to a truth that could never be shaken. God's love was infinite, and his grace was sufficient. This unwavering connection to God gave Jonathan the strength to continue his mission, to plant seeds of truth and trust in God's promise that, in time, they would bloom. Through prayer, Jonathan found not only comfort but purpose, and in that purpose, he discovered a peace that surpassed all understanding. Father Jonathan's story is more than just the account of one man's transformation. It is a reflection of the universal journey we all face. It speaks to the heart of our struggles with faith, the limits of tradition, and the longing for something deeper, a connection to the infinite love and grace of God. His story reminds us that God's love is not bound by human understanding, and His grace is not confined to the walls of any doctrine or institution. For decades, Jonathan believed he was serving God faithfully, teaching others to follow the rules, traditions, and practices he thought were essential to salvation. Yet his near-death experience revealed a truth so profound that it shattered the foundation of his old beliefs. God's love and grace are far greater than we can comprehend. They are not dependent on human actions, rituals, or worthiness, but are freely given to all who are willing to receive them. This revelation is not just for Jonathan. It is for all of us. How often do we allow our faith to be constrained by fear, judgment, or the expectations of others? How many times have we felt unworthy, believing that God's love is reserved for those who meet certain standards? Jonathan's story challenges these misconceptions and calls us to step into the liberating truth of God's boundless love. If you've ever felt stuck, trapped by outdated beliefs, burdened by guilt, or overwhelmed by doubt, this message is for you. You don't have to earn God's love. You don't have to strive for perfection or live in fear of falling short. God's grace is not a reward for the righteous, but a gift for all, especially the broken and the lost. His love is not conditional. It is infinite and unchanging, reaching you where you are, no matter how far you think you've wandered. Jonathan's journey also reminds us of the cost of truth. It isn't always easy to accept. It challenges us to let go of what is comfortable, to question what we've been taught, and to embrace a new understanding that may disrupt our lives and relationships. Yet, as painful as it can be, the truth is what sets us free. It frees us from the chains of fear, from the lies we tell ourselves, and from the limitations we place on God's love. Through Jonathan's struggles, we see that seeking the truth is not a rejection of faith, but an act of deep trust in God. It is a willingness to believe that His love is greater than our doubts, His grace stronger than our failures, and His presence constant even in our moments of greatest uncertainty. For those who feel distant from God, who wonder if they are too flawed, too lost, or too unworthy to be loved, Jonathan's story offers hope. It is a reminder that God does not measure us by our perfection or our ability to follow the rules. He sees us as we are and loves us unconditionally. His grace is a gift, freely given, waiting for us to open our hearts and receive it. This story is also a challenge. It invites us to move beyond complacency, to question the traditions and teachings that may have limited our understanding of God. It calls us to seek a deeper relationship with Him, not through rigid rules, but through genuine, living faith. Father Jonathan's journey is a testament to the transformative power of God's love. It shows us that even in the face of rejection, isolation, and pain, we can find strength and purpose by holding on to the truth. His story reminds us that we are all called to seek, to question, and to grow in our understanding of God's infinite grace. So, if you are struggling, questioning, or feeling lost, take heart. God is not distant. He is not confined to the traditions of men or the limits of our understanding. His grace is vast enough to cover all your doubts, fears, and failures. His love is strong enough to reach you wherever you are and to carry you through whatever you face. Let Jonathan's story inspire you to seek the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. For in finding the truth, you will find freedom, and in that freedom, you will discover the fullness of God's love, a love that accepts you as you are, transforms you, and calls you to become all you are meant to be. This is the ultimate message. Do not fear the truth. Embrace it, seek it, and let it lead you closer to the heart of God. For in the truth, there is freedom, and in that freedom, there is life everlasting. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories and creating a space for open, heartfelt conversations. Click the notification bell so you're always updated when we post new content. Together, let's explore the unseen, celebrate the miraculous, and inspire one another to live with love, faith, and wonder